Washington Journal continues.
But the notion that there's some fundamental contradiction between being a religious person, which I consider myself to be, and understanding the broad strategy and approach of evolution, which I certainly do accept, I see no contradiction there.
Thanks for your call. Edward Sisson.
Well, I have to say I agree with the caller. I do think that there are many people who look at the Bible and see the statements in Genesis that God created man out of the dust. I believe there's one of the, the Reverend can correct me. That certainly seems to be contradicted by scientific data that shows development of creatures one into the next. There's a different Bible verse that, it's interesting. You can actually look at the other Bible verses and see how they're consistent with evolutionary theory. And he commands the dust and commands the sea to produce these things and so forth. But I do think that there are some profound conflicts, and many authors, such as Richard Dawkins, have said that there are profound conflicts. I personally have never had a theological problem with evolutionary theory and my religious faith. It was mostly academic curiosity when I found that Sir Frederick Hoyle, a professor at Cambridge University, wrote a book called The Mathematics of Evolution that he said DNA could not have come out by chance. And to me, that was a scientist telling me that there's a pretty interesting scientific dispute here that's worth paying attention to.
My concern is the way that evolution is taught in school. I have two children, and they're taught basically that evolution is a fact, that it's the truth, and there is no alternative. Without looking at any other proposed alternative.
I also have two teenagers, and they're, of course, taught that evolution is true, and I have never argued with them about it. To me, I just see it as, I don't see the issue as being that fundamental to their religious belief, and I wouldn't want to drag them into what I treat mostly as an interesting intellectual field to inquire into. But of course, many people do, and perhaps they're correct, that if you teach people that evolution is true, and not only that, that you're taught that it's a fact, and so once you're told something is a fact, then it has to be true. All data that you see must be consistent with it. It changes the way psychologically you evaluate the data that you receive. Because now your mind is looking at how can I understand this to be consistent with the fact I've already decided to be true. So you never entertain intellectually the possibility that maybe what I'm seeing disproves that what I thought was a fact is not a fact. And so I do feel that teaching that evolution is so certain that it should be treated as a fact cuts off a quite appropriate skeptical look at the data, that I think once you say maybe it's not a fact, suddenly you see, well, this data basically shows that it isn't a fact.
What is this data? We get back to the
complexity of the cell. Yes, the complexity of the cell and all of the stuff that's contained in books like Molecular Biology of the Cell.
The cellular biologists in general do not have any problem. In fact, overwhelmingly do not have any problem with evolution. When you talk about this being kind of an intellectual interest, I worry also about what the practical effect of what you're saying is, because you confuse students who in fact ought to know that evolution is a centerpiece of modern biology. In fact, some people say you can't even explain biology without understanding evolution because it is scientifically valid. So now we have battles in this country in places like Dover and out temporarily in Southern California, battles over this at a time when other countries, in Japan, there's no fight about evolution. In Germany, in Britain, no fight about this. And as a consequence, I think we do dumb down science education when we suggest that there's some alternative scientific theory to evolution. It doesn't help our kids compete. We're in a global, international marketplace. We cannot waste time teaching junk science when we can and do need to spend more time talking about evolution.
We've got an email from a viewer named Stan who writes, I was a school teacher and I can tell you that this debate is why we are behind in science. One cannot teach something and have it debunked every Sunday and expect the kids to accept one thing they are taught as untrue, but everything else is fact. Don't you think this keeping our children don't you think this keeping our children from being informed, people who don't accept evolution, don't accept climate change, etc.?
Well, I think that, I mean, I appreciate the emailer's concern, because certainly if you believe something is true and it's important for everybody to believe it, you're upset when students go to another institution, namely the church, and are told that it isn't correct. However, we've just been hearing from Reverend Lynn that it's appropriate to separate the church and the state. And frankly, if the churches wish to teach what they're teaching, I would trust that Reverend Lynn wouldn't want the state to be telling them to teach something different. So I think that one is pretty inevitable, and it's an outcome of the separation of church and state. I would disagree with the argument that it is this issue that causes America to fall behind in science. It seems to me, I mean, I bring a somewhat unique perspective to this because my undergraduate degree is from MIT, but it's in architecture, and the technical title of my degree is Bachelor of Science in Art and Design. And I have always been interested in the intersection of science and art and creative thinking, and I chose not to be a scientist. There are many other, even though I was immersed in that world, even though my brother is a PhD scientist, and my other brother is a Master of Science and Engineering, and my father was a nuclear submariner. So I've been intimately exposed to the scientific and engineering worlds and chose not to be part of it. And there are many, many reasons why people find other fields more interesting, and I really do not think that a dispute over this issue is what's turning students off.
You alluded earlier, Mr. Sisson, to your experiences in Kansas. Tell us about that, please.
In 2005, the elected, constitutionally provided for Kansas State Board of Education scheduled 6 days of hearings on these scientific issues. The first 3 days were devoted to the challengers. The second 3 days in the second week were devoted to what I refer to as the mainstream side, the side that Reverend Lynn has been representing. And each side could put on as many witnesses as they wanted, provided that they were subject to cross-examination. I was asked by the people who put together the challenger side to be the lawyer who would cross-examine the scientists for the mainstream side. And I was looking forward to that. Reverend Lynn says talk to molecular biologists and you'll find there's no questioning of evolution as the explanation for their field. Well, I respectfully suggest that if I cross-examine them, perhaps they would see some reasons. But led by the American Association for the Advancement of Science, all the mainstream scientists boycotted, and so I wasn't able to cross-examine any. And I feel that that was a real missed opportunity. The science community is constantly saying, if only we could explain our position better. Well, there was a choice opportunity. You pass it up. And it was dismissive of the people. When a theory, or as you wish to call it, a fact, moves from the realms of science into the state-supported curriculum, it becomes another thing that the government is buying and providing to the citizens. And it has the right to inquire into the soundness of that product, if you will, as it has in any other field that the government obtains and then provides to the citizens.